Welcome to Keeping Tabs. I'm Tabitha Crock, and every Monday we talk to a different community member here in North Idaho. And then we end our weeks with something I'm passionate about: the adventures, outdoors, and sports. So follow along to hear some amazing stories and meet some very interesting people. Okay, I have Mike Bauer with me today, and he is one of the candidates for the Kootenai County Sheriff. So if you're not aware, he will be running against the Republican candidate, Bob Norris. And I am excited to chat with you because I want to know more about you, and I want our listeners and people listening on to Keeping Tabs about you and what you're running for, and just a little bit more about who you are. And right now we're dealing with a lot of things in the public. And I think the biggest pieces for me, it's something I'm passionate about, is public safety. And so I want people to get involved and be educated in voting for the right person that is going to do the best for Kootenai County. So thank you so much for being on, and tell us a little bit about you, a little bit of your background.
Okay, well, I moved here 8 years ago from Trot Creek, Montana, where I lived for 9 years. I had a hay farm there. I couldn't keep up with that. I just needed to really retire because hay farming is not retirement. Prior to that, I did 33 years with the LA County Sheriff Department. Retired as a captain. My last 5 years were in command positions, high-risk positions mainly, and that's the SWAT teams, the Aero Bureau, K9 units, and then my last assignment was major crimes, which is detective functions of vice, morals, gambling, your intelligence, terrorism, those sort of functions. At the time, they were all under Major Crimes Bureau. So they've since been dispersed throughout the department. But at that time, there were joint commands. And when I went into retirement, I thought, well, I'll just have a nice retirement. I moved to Trot Creek, Montana, and I began working on a missing deputy who worked for me in 1998. John Ajay disappeared June 11th, 98. And I began working on that case because I found new information, and I've been working on that case ever since. I think Sokol over at Spokane Paper put a link to that article on that incident in case anybody's interested. But that kept me in the law enforcement loop. I went down to work with the Homicide Bureau on that case. I got involved in Sanders County, Montana, in 2 sheriff's races, trying to help a candidate win. I was a deputy coroner for about 1.5 years down there, and I learned how to do circumstantial investigations on death cases. I learned to respect poor Dr. Keene's situation here in Kootenai County, because I don't think he has enough resources to do the job. So I stayed in law enforcement. When I moved here, I got involved in land use with Northwest Property because they were recategorizing this land. I live in a Carlin area, and they were going to call it countryside. If it passed, I had too many horses, and I didn't know what to do with my horses. So I went down to the Planning Commission. One of the first things I did was testify against that ULUC. It eventually failed, and it went away. Land use is still an interest of mine, because I think your assessments and your private property rights are very important. In Montana, we had no building codes, we had no inspections. And so in 9 years, I was back in more of a free state. When I moved back to Kootenai County, it was closer to California's real strict codes. And I think I may have rebelled a little bit. I think Chris Filios would agree with that. So when I moved here, I stayed out of law enforcement. I've watched Sheriff Wolfinger. I have absolutely no problem with what he's done with that department. I told him at a meeting with the BOCC that I thought that it was going to be really hard on his people that he and Dan Matos left at the same time. That was really my only criticism of him. He did not step into the sheriff's election until very late. He made various analysis, which have been debated and disputed with letters to the editor. My view is that the sheriff made a pretty objective analysis of all the candidates, and that's about where I'd like to leave that. But I would just say that the criticisms I heard of Wolfinger and his leadership, I don't think were justified given the resources he has, limited resources, in my opinion, and the fact that the department is generally staffed competently enough with the budget they have to do the job. And my goal would be to do it with that limited resources with a smile on my face and not a bunch of heat and pressure on BOCC to give me money that they don't have.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm excited. You lived in Montana. I'm a college. I went to college over in Montana, and I'm a Harrison kid. So you're in my neck of the woods.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I graduated, went to high school and elementary over in Harrison, and worked all through my years. So yeah, that's exciting. So what is, I know there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of things we can kind of talk about. I mean, we could be here all day talking about different things and how you're better than this, but what's one of the number one things is important to you if you step into the role as sheriff?
Well, I think it's an attitude of not displaying a calm attitude, not displaying fear. I'm not afraid of the population growing, and I'm not going to try to get out of my lane and try to slow down growth or any other sort of thing. I'm not all that concerned, fearful of people being armed in this state, because I approved of the law that said people could carry concealed without a permit. I approved of that at the time. I have firearms. I'm not a gun nut per se, but I'm very familiar with firearms. And what concerns me a lot is that the COVID situation was based on fear, that everyone is fearful. The state prison release center is based on fear that these criminals are going to come out and get us. The population growth, having low-income housing, bringing people in here who maybe are going to cause the demands on law enforcement. No, law enforcement is here to do the job that the people need, not to manage the people so that the resources work. Government is designed, in my opinion, is my personal philosophy, is government is here to do what is necessary based on what the people have chosen freely to do themselves, where they want to live and where they want to develop their property or whatever they want to do. And the sheriff job is to keep them as safe as possible, because we don't want them taking the law in their own hands. We want them to feel confident that the sheriff can handle the situation. You saw that with this situation on Sherman and Coeur d'Alene, that it was obvious to me that people felt that it was necessary that they do that. And I would like to see a situation where I had enough staffing and I had the proper deployment, at least in my area. I can't speak for the chiefs, Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene. I can't speak for them, but for the sheriff's area, that I had enough resources, that people living in my area didn't feel like they had to do that, that I could handle that problem if we had a threat to the community. That's my job. And it's not a failure, but it's a disturbing sort of a phenomenon that's occurred here, that people don't feel safe and they feel they have to go out and supplement traditional law enforcement, pay for it with their tax dollars. And so between COVID and that phenomenon, we're really seeing some interesting times. Not to mention probably the most unusual sheriff's race that this county has seen in a lot of people's lifetimes, because you don't have your traditional Idaho sheriff like Ben Wolfinger in the race, and you would say the preferable type of candidate you would want for your sheriff. You have us ruffians showing up who are trying to convince you that we can assume an Idaho philosophy here. Yeah. And in that regard, one of the things I've said in my website and various comments I've made in other forums is, I feel like I got the city pulled out of me in Montana. In 9 years, I did. I got over here, and when it came back at me, it was uncomfortable. I know how people feel about their rights and about being left basically alone if that's what they want, and law enforcement staying in their lane and not encroaching on other people's freedoms. And that is common sense, humane law enforcement. Okay, no excessive use of force. Well, everyone just following the golden rule. And that's the sort of philosophy that I would be pursuing first with the management, the captains and this lieutenant sergeant supervisor team, but with the whole department. I think they're in good shape. Some people say they're just not in good shape at all, and it takes somebody to come in and fix it. Most organizations have staffing problems. Most of them have budget problems. Most of them have retention problems. Most of them pay problems. This is very common across the country. This place here is, in my opinion, those sort of problems under Wolfinger's management are exaggerated. In order to take a stand, the public's going to support you for that sort of thing. And I hate to see that. It's based, again, on fear that the department's not running right, needs to be repaired. And like I say, I support Wolfinger 100%, and I trust his judgment.
Yeah. So that's great. Yeah, Wolfinger, I've known him since I remember meeting him when I was like in 3rd grade. We went to the sheriff department as like a field trip. So I've known this guy for a long time too. And yeah, I agree with you on a lot of fronts. What do you think that are kind of the key things that you bring from your past experience that you bring into Kootenai County? You know, especially with the police department.
When I came on the job, I was 19 years old, worked in the jail. I learned how to survive in a jail setting in which you're greatly outnumbered. You learn to talk to people. You learn to be a people person. You learn to try to find that communication link with people. And that's something that you can learn it. A lot of people seem to have trouble with it, but I believe I've got the ability to go over to the BOCC or go into a staff meeting or go to a community meeting, whether it's ministers or whether it's the political organizations, and communicate with them what it is I'm trying to accomplish. Now, that was developed over 30 some years. I worked on the '84 Olympics, and we went back to Washington, D.C. We had to interface with the federal intelligence agencies on threats to President Reagan on that project, and you learn to respect and appreciate other law enforcement agencies' ability to help you do your job and how we all need to get along. And then up here in North Idaho, I see that it's a certain element wants no federal involvement here, and that is just not a workable situation. It's just not realistic. And so I have a general overall experience of what I would consider to be the management and the leadership aspects of law enforcement, which I think would be helpful here. I wouldn't say that I rise head and shoulders above Ben, because I don't know what the problems are inside that organization. I'm not allowed to go in there right now. I'm not allowed to go in there and look around. I wish I were, but I think you saw in the paper that the sheriff presumptive is allowed in, and he's working inside that organization on some sort of a transition team. And I would just say that we've all been to civics class, and we know that you're not elected until the general election. And the public is confused by my candidacy as an independent, because they thought historically here, when the Republican wins, that's it, everybody get out of the way. Just get out of the way. And I feel it and I see it. I don't want to fight against it. I understand it. But if come November election I win, it's going to be a very interesting situation down there at the sheriff's office when I walk in and they've already transitioned to somebody else. That's what I find a little odd. And that is really my concern, is the sheriff needs to be nonpartisan. Judges, nonpartisan. Why should the law enforcement officer be told what to do by a party, whether it's Democrat or Republican? A sheriff should be neutral, has to represent all the people, both sides. I went to a celebration of life. Some people didn't like that. I went to the Liberty thing. Some people didn't like that, but I would represent everybody in this county, regardless of party. And yet I see, and I have seen, how this party is the elected officials ramrodded by one party, and I have specific individual differences of opinion about some of their decisions. I don't agree with that party on every issue, and I think that they need to be more broadly. Their decisions need to be more broadly held than they are. And so the sheriff, in my opinion, needs to be nonpartisan. I'd really like to see that structurally. I don't know if the state would ever approve it because it gives up too much control to the local political apparatus in Idaho. It's a bit complicated, but it's just my view that the sheriff should not be bending his knee to the chairman of a political party, any political party. The sheriff represents the people.
Perfect. Well, let's ask a couple fun questions since we got a lot of serious stuff going on here. So what is your favorite restaurant here in Kootenai County?
I like Anthony's if I want to spend $50 for lunch. And I took Bob Norris to lunch at Anthony's when I first wanted to talk to him about his candidacy. And I paid. He owes me a lunch.
Yes,
he owes me a lunch, $50. I like Moon. I like Moon on Sherman. I think that it's just the coolest, most easygoing place. I've been to Wolf Lodge a lot with people from out of town. That's how you immerse people in the country to Western type of an atmosphere here in Idaho. But if I just want to just relax and have a burger, and I'd probably pick Moon.
Yeah, I'm the same. All three of those are fantastic local restaurants.
I used to like Carlin Bay Resort, but that's another issue, isn't it? That is another issue. It's right down the street, and I used to be able to walk to it. So
perfect. Well, what about we know that you like obviously horses, and you have been haying. What are some of your fun hobbies? What are things that you like to do outside of all of your hard work?
I'm a private pilot. I have been since about '96. I built an experimental aircraft over in Montana on my airstrip in Montana, and I built it and flew it. I flew it 300 hours. It's an RV6 on my website under gallery. If you go all the way down, you'll see me flying that plane. I had someone take a picture from another airplane. And and until you build something and fly in it yourself, you really come to terms with your mortality. Trust me. So flying has been a hobby of mine for a long time. I don't have time right now to do that anymore. I kept my plane in Burt Rattan's hangar over at Coeur d'Alene Airport for quite a while. And I've flown all over this area, all over Kootenai County, and looked at it from the air in my plane. And that is what led me to my view that population is not a problem here. This is a huge county. We got 165,000 people. Well, all of Montana has 1 million, and all of Idaho has 1.8 million. We got room here. We just have to manage where we put them. That's up to the cities and that. So anyway, the flying was important to me. I have 16 ducks. I have roan ducks, and I have a few Pekin ducks, and they take up a lot of my time. I really like them. They're happy to see me, and they're fun. I have horses. We have German Shepherd dogs. My wife got ill recently, and she's getting better now, but she used to ride all these roads around here, and she would ride for hours and hours around here. She really loves that. She'd go over on the trails, rails to trails, which is a beautiful, beautiful trail out there, really nice. And we really enjoyed that, usually out of that bridge just east of Harrison, little parking lot there. And we've seen moose. We've seen just about everything on that trail. It's just beautiful to get away in the middle of where there's people. You're on a really nice, relaxing trail. And running, I've done running. Other than that, our place, 11 acres, a lot of maintenance. taking care of the horses, cleaning up after them, fetching hay out of Montana over Thompson Pass, for my winter feed. Just, working around the place. I've done that, but I have always investigated either on phone or going down south, looking for my missing deputy and looking for several other missing people who are associated with that case. And so that really is my passion. And until recently, I was, how should I put it? Godfathering the missing deputy's daughter. She's passed away. She was found shot to death in Idaho Falls recently. And that situation, still unresolved, has kind of thrown my project for a loop. It's very distressing. And she and her father's dog are on my website in the gallery section when she was 5 years old, and she was with that dog. Anyway, that project still takes up a lot of my time. I have boxes and boxes of court investigative stuff, and I do it pro bono. I do it for free, hundreds of hours, but it's almost a rebate to his family and the citizens of LA County that I'm doing this to try to solve that situation.
So what I'm really gathering is that you don't like to be retired.
We're all going to get old, right? And if we don't use our minds, we're gonna get rusty. And so I read a lot. I read every night. I can read a book usually in about 2 weeks at about maybe 15 minutes a night. And then I let my brain process what I read, and then I look for something else the next day in that book. Finally, I finished that book. And I love books about history. I love books about Montana history, especially. Because when I lived over there, I really came to study the formation of that territory, Idaho territory, Washington, and then Utah territories, and how they all merged, and then how they were formed into states, when they became states, and what sort of government structures they tried to work under. They all had experience with vigilantes taking public justice. That that should be a hot topic, but it's not, I guess. But public justice and the people assuming the role of law enforcement when there are elected and paid officials in jails, and that's a very troubling situation for me in that respect, because of the history of the West has not only tolerated it, but they have celebrated it in certain places. Kind of interesting from a professional law enforcement point of view. I think it deserves study.
Mm-hmm. I agree. One other fun question is, what is one life lesson you've learned the hard way?
I've been married too many times, and I think some of it was my fault. and I think I probably could have been a little kinder in those situations instead of reacting, being a reactionary. I could have been more proactive. I wasn't a big fan of marriage counseling. Part of it was the job. When I worked down south, it was 24 hours a day job. When I worked as a captain of SEV, I think for 3 years, I think I didn't sleep 4 or 5 hours a night, and I was gone on every call out, over 300 call outs that we had there, high risk warrants. And so I became a workaholic, and that is a big toll on your family if you can't pay appropriate attention and nurture a relationship. And so I think that's what I've learned the hard way, is that I could have done better. Now, my current wife and I've been married almost 20 years now. 20 years is generally my record. And I love her dearly. She doesn't deserve this health problem she has. To do my best to take care of her, and I'm trying to mend my ways.
Fantastic. All right, so we have talked a little bit about, there is a lot going on right now with social justice. There is a lot going on with COVID. I mean, it's struggling for anybody within politics or law enforcement, anything along those lines. And being a law enforcement daughter, I'm very passionate about people getting in there and actually like making a difference by getting into politics, or just registering and becoming a voter and voting for the right person that will do best for our, for North Idaho and for Kootenai County and for our public safety, maybe reiterate like how important it is to get involved and be an educated voter.
Well, of course. We're like I said earlier, we're living in very interesting times, and there's a lot to learn from this. How do we deal with a pandemic? How do we deal with the various opinions of the conflict between freedom and safety? It's a real, it's a historic dilemma, for government people to study. Is how do you make people feel like the government is doing a good job and a safe job, uh, and, and convince them that they don't have to take things into their own hands? So you saw that down on Sherman. You see that with COVID. Certain people, want to recall Governor Little because they think he was abusive in his orders, and that this conflict is. It's worth studying. I don't know that there's an answer to it. I look to see what Sheriff Wolfinger's doing. He's getting paid to do this. He's a law enforcement leader. What has he said? His position has been a fairly strict enforcement, and a lot of people are upset about that. A lot of people are, and some candidates for this sheriff's primary, discuss that argument a lot, that COVID was not supposed to keep us in our homes. It wasn't, the government didn't have the right statistics. There's a lot of lack of confidence in the public health system and in the law enforcement. And my position on for example, I have a written position on tracing. Should sheriff's deputies be involved in that process? And my position is no, because they're not trained and they don't have the equipment, and they are critical elements of public safety. I think that that's a public health issue, and if they have safety issues to try to accomplish that, we can certainly accompany them using the training and equipment we've been given to help them be safe while they do it. But when I see enforcement actions on the part of law enforcement specifically, that concerns me. If Panhandle Health had a team of people going to these parks or going to various places, and that they were health professionals wanting these people to not congregate or in a social distance bed or whatever it was, and they had difficulties doing that, and of course call the sheriff. Well, come on, he'll give you a hand, but I don't think that was necessarily the sheriff's role.
Perfect. All right. So we're about out of time. Just leave us with a little bit of a last little, nugget to tell us.
Okay. No, I've been encouraged to, let's say, tone it down a little bit. I've been encouraged to be more, let's say, constructive in my criticism of other candidates, and I'm working on that. It's hard to do that when there's things that need to be said that aren't being said, and so in that respect, if I've offended anybody, I apologize. But one of the things that I'm going to start working on is what I said last August when I made my candidate statement. I said that the sheriff and either one of us who wins, and I don't know Justin Nagel, I don't know what his financial situation is. Bob and I don't need the money. Neither one of us need the money. And my challenge to Bob, no matter which one of us wins, is that I said I would give at least $10,000 of my salary to local charity every year, and probably more. That's my feeling, and I believe my undersheriff would do the same thing, to give back to the community, because it's the right thing to do. So I put out a challenge to Bob. You agreed to the same thing, and then the community can appreciate that they get a little rebate off of their property taxes, and the community gets some charitable work. I'm probably going to start with food banks. That's really a critical issue here. I'm going to start with some of the women's shelters. The violence shelters really need help. And I think that message needs to get out there, that either Bob or I, whoever wins, really would be in a situation to be very generous with local charities especially.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time today, and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much. It was great meeting you.